sunset in your eyes, see the thorn twist in your side. I'll wait for you. Sleight of hand and a twist of fate, on a bed of nails she makes me wait, and I wait without you, with or without you, with or without you. Through the storm we reach the shore, give it all